I analyzed how much money Poppy Playtime's Playtime Company has to figure out how they can afford everything we've seen and everything we can expect to come after us in the future. In yet another Mascot horror game for me to throw my science mind at, that sees us going through what this company is, what they've done in the past and present to figure out what the cost, what the value of the monsters, let alone the entire underground facility itself, whose depths we're only beginning to figure out is. And seeing how this toy company stood as the most dominating toy company on the planet that grew to use its hoard of cash for evil experiments, the assets that this company has, and the value that they would sell for if they were all turned into cold hard cash, would be nothing short of miraculous to terrifying enough to keep anyone quiet. Poppy Playtime begins with us, supposedly a former employee returning to the abandoned headquarters of the Playtime Corporation that mysteriously shut down almost overnight, with none of the employees who went to work that day ever coming back, except for us, who wake up one day to find a letter and a VHS tape urging us to come back and find the missing employees, along with a poppy flower nearly 10 years later. Along the way, we meet many of Playtime's horrifying cash-filled experiments that unsurprisingly try really hard to kill us, including meeting and freeing Poppy Playtime herself, who wants us to stay to set things right, referring to us fixing the company's misdeeds, which resulted in the many Mascot monsters turning on the scientists and factory workers one day 10 years ago, which was likely around the mid-1990s, shutting the place down. In Chapter 1, we first see what is publicly known as the entire Playtime Co. toy factory, with the public being unaware that eventually they had a massive secret underground lab built underneath it, with the construction company easily being paid off to keep quiet, meaning that this toy company was absolutely loaded before any of its immoral experiments took place. Seeing how this company was founded in the 1930s by founder Elliot Ludwig, who went on to sell his highly successful Poppy doll known as Poppy Playtime around the globe in the 1950s, who brought in nearly untold amounts of cash as she could supposedly talk and converse with children just like another human. Ludwig quickly amassed himself a fortune, in later years coming up with a line of other successful toys like Brawn the Dinosaur in 1961, the less successful Boxy Boo in 1966, Candy Cat in 1967, and his roaring success of Huggy Wuggy in 1984, alongside many others. In its heyday, before the factory's gruesome end, Playtime Co. would easily be the most competitive toy company on the planet, meeting and possibly eclipsing the likes of many top toy companies like Bandai Namco, Hasbro, and even Lego, whose recent yearly revenues sit at $7.47 billion, $5.86 billion, and over $9.28 billion. And using these toy companies along with the largest toy manufacturer in the world, being Mattel Incorporated, that sits at nearly $12 billion a year, we could see Playtime with its Miracle doll averaging what in the modern day would be somewhere around $10 to $11 billion a year due to its unprecedented popularity, but not too much more since it doesn't own a bunch of different companies like Mattel does, which as far as we know isn't turning kids into Barbies and Hot Wheel cars. Then looking at the rather large original toy factory that produced these toys that we can clearly see in Chapter 1's VHS tape and the main menu, the ridiculous size of this factory could again be equatable to the largest toy factories in the world, and the cost or value of these factories is easily in the hundreds of millions, if not way more. With companies like Lego announcing that it plans to spend nearly $1 billion to create a new US-based facility that could potentially hold around 1,700 employees, as others announce $500 million plans to expand their already multi-billion-dollar main factories, it's likely that just the top floor or otherwise the original Playtime toy factory could cost the same, being valued at the nice price of $1.5 billion to $2 billion, giant smokestacks included. But then we get to Playtime Co.'s not-so-mainstream orphan program, which unfortunately served as a great PR for Playtime, who secretly encouraged the public and even employees to adopt and send all the orphans they could could to their program, with the company's underground orphanage being located in the part of the facility known as Playcare. And oh man, did Playtime rake in all the orphans they could by the hundreds. This company had to have one of, if not the largest orphan program in the world, as the many experimentation notes that we come across in the facility. The first one we find starts off at the number 814, showing us that Playtime scientists were currently experimenting on rats with its poppy seed solution, yielding undesirable results. As the note's writer, Elliot Ludwig, concludes that maybe experimentation on larger subjects, aka children, would produce better results. And from here on out, Playtime paid to construct a massive orphanage along with everything they would need to take care of hundreds of orphans at once, as later experimentation notes get up to and presumably past 1,222. And this plan was not only so maniacal, with no one being around to notice the orphans who go missing after being chosen for experimentation, being forcibly turned into a chosen mascot, but if anyone did come knocking, the company could easily play it off as that particular kid being adopted. Looking at the cost of paying for all of the equipment and services needed to keep these kids alive so they could be tested and experimented on, we find that the startup cost to register and buy the necessary equipment like beds, kitchenware, toys, and play equipment runs around $10,000 to $30,000 for just 10 to 30 orphans, otherwise an average $1,000 per kid. Playtime, on the other hand, needed to be able to house and feed anywhere around the likes of possibly a lowball 500 orphans at any given time, making the cost for this orphanage run at about $500,000. Truly a drop in the swimming pool sized bucket for Playtime. But then we come to Playtime's possibly most expensive assets, being the horde of Mascot monsters that the company painfully tested, experimented, researched, built, housed, and studied some more, all so they could create and sell living toys to children around the world. And oh man, would that make them a lot of money. And the cost, let alone the perceived value for the average living toy, let alone the giant mascots that the company spent the majority of their time attempting to perfect, is enormous, if they were ever to be sold to anyone who was insane enough to buy them. And like the many other horror mascots and pieces of technology that we have researched and covered on this channel, we could consider these mascots as being priceless, mostly due to the fact that no one else on Earth has the technology or the means to create them, no matter how much they wanted to. And Playtime certainly didn't hesitate to turn each and every one of their beloved toys into a giant mascot, no matter how bad and dangerous they turned out to be, pumping them out with no apparent end in sight until Experiment 1006 decided to orchestrate Playtime's end, ordering all of the monsters to kill all of the workers and researchers throughout the facility. So far in the story, we have seen or have heard of at least 17 giant mascots, along with not 4 but actually 18 Huggies in Chapter 2's Whack-A-Wuggy game, along with the miniature Huggies and dozens of other smaller toys that we see scattered around the factory, sometimes hanging and sometimes bleeding. So if we had to put a number to the price of these many mascots and monsters, things get a little interesting. We know that they were once living children who were somehow turned and revived as one of Playtime's mascots using Playtime's poppy flower solution. We also know that according to economists and government agencies, that a human life is considered to be worth about $10 million. However, looking at and estimating what the cost for these sentient mascots and comparing to the cost of what previous other advanced weapons, technology, and mascots that we've gone over on this channel, we could say that as an asset and even a potential marketing tool for the company to sell loads, and I mean at least 10x of what it's currently doing with its lifelike toys, Playtime could value one of these experiments as being around anywhere from $1 billion for the smaller guys to $10 billion for each of the larger mascots. That would give around a collective worth of $190 billion. But what about Playtime's other assets like the Grab Pack, a piece of technology that allows the user to shoot one of its arms across the room, allowing them to grab and pull on various things, swing through the air like Spider-Man, fan, turn on electrical switches, and act as a key. Man, is this technology as useful as it is both rare and valuable. So what would the price of yet another futuristic piece of gear like a grab pack cost? I mean, just looking at its capabilities, let alone its strength, to be able to pull a full-sized adult across the room like Link's hookshot, this again is yet another somewhat priceless piece of technology that would sell for whatever the highest bidder or world government would be willing to pay to get their hands on it. But putting a number to what this thing could reasonably cost in comparison to other big government purchases like new multi-purpose military jets that are valued at $80 million a pop, or the hypothetical $40 million killer animatronic, the cost of a single grab pack could be somewhere around $30 to $50 million. But as ridiculous as the cost for the many monsters and inventions I've researched are, Playtime Corporation and its special revival flowers really gives them a run for their money. Not to mention the company's secret lower levels, aka the enormous underground facility that they had dug and built up in complete bribed secrecy. I mean, this underground facility has at least 5 distinct areas, each being as large as an entire industrial warehouse or major company factory in their own right, that the company even needed to have a high-speed train built to rush supplies, mascots, and whatever else they needed from area to area. And it still takes quite some time to get there. This place is practically an entire underground city in its own right, complete with advanced lab equipment and enormous testing rooms to boot. We know from a letter that we found in Chapter 2 that Playtime hired Warren Bach Construction to completely dig out and build all of the underground facilities. We also know that price really didn't seem to be much of an object for Playtime or its ownership at this point, who had a lot of Poppy doll money to spend, and they were very willing to pay whatever was needed to keep the whole thing quiet, offering $100,000 extra or seeing how the lab's construction possibly took place sometime after Poppy's creation, say around 1961, would make this $100,000 be equal to just around $1 million today, which is awfully low bribe money when looking at just how expensive moving Earth, let alone this much, and then filling it with mounds of steel, rooms, walkways, the world's largest ball pit. I mean, Playtime did sweeten the deal by saying that they would take care of all of the necessary equipment needed for the excavation, but we are still talking around a multi-billion-dollar job here. Specifically, if the Garden of Banban video taught us anything about building giant underground city-sized facilities, we're talking about upwards to probably around $125 to a $175 billion job for this facility. A facility that takes a speeding train nearly a full 2.5 minutes to almost get to the next closest area, which, comparing this to the average 2 to 3 minute New York subway ride, that's literally 1.5 to 2 miles of track between these areas. And then throw in an extra $5 billion worth of research and beach tech medical equipment onto the pile, and you've got yourself the most expensive evil lair in existence. But as expensive as the mascots are, as valuable as the underground facility is, they aren't Playtime's most valuable or remarkable asset. They are simply the means to test their most valuable asset by far, being the poppy seed solution. The same solution that allowed Elliot Ludwig to bring a girl back to life as a poppy doll, and eventually many other people and children as the company's tragic mascots. While this solution created from mainly poppy flowers and other easy to obtain materials, the fact that it can reanimate a deceased person, essentially reviving their dead cells, is just as insane sounding as its price tag. The problem though is we don't actually know how they do it, how they actually apply whatever the exact poppy flower formula is to bring people back. Tragic that they've used such a discovery in such a horrifying way, and perhaps there is no way to fully bring someone back without giving them some sort of new body, but we really just don't know. In spite of this, the price tag of creating such a promising, life-giving technology, when compared to other high high potential and highly priced scientific substances could still be valued around $400 to $500 billion. And if past research has taught us anything, that could be just for a gram of the stuff. In all, if Playtime Corporation was to sell off all of its assets to the highest supervillain bidder, their total earnings or net worth would be valued at $875 billion and $50 million. But if none of this was very interesting, then I saved an interesting fact for last. As high valued as Playtime Co.'s assets currently are, they still can't quite keep up with the riches beholden to everyone's favorite pizza chain, Freddy Fazbear's Entertainment, whose many haunted animatronics fetch one heck of a surprising price. So check out this video on 5 Nights at Freddy's Fazbear Entertainment's riches. See you in the next one.